On the evening of February 11, 1992, an American nuclear submarine was lurking 20 meters below the surface of the Barents Sea, 14 miles from the Russian port of Murmansk. The Soviet Union had dissolved less than 2 months earlier. The Cold War was officially over. But the United States Navy was still spying on Russia's most powerful naval base. The submarine was USS Baton Rouge, a Los Angeles-class nuclear attack submarine. She was on a covert intelligence mission, part of a decades-old program that American submariners called Operation Holystone. Her crew believed they were completely alone and undetected in the shallow, noisy waters off Kilden Island. At 8:16 local time, something massive struck the Baton Rouge from below. The impact shook the entire submarine. Metal scraped against metal. The hull groaned. The crew had no idea what had hit them. What hit them was a Russian Sierra-class nuclear submarine, B-276 Kostroma, attempting to surface directly underneath the American boat. 9,000 tons of titanium-hulled Russian submarine had driven its conning tower into the belly of the American spy sub at 8 miles per hour. Both submarines were nuclear-powered. Both were carrying torpedoes, and neither one had known the other was there. The Cold War was supposed to be over, but 14 miles from Murmansk, in the freezing waters of the Barents Sea, it was still very much alive. This is naval depth. To understand why an American submarine was hiding in Russian waters 2 months after the fall of the Soviet Union, you must understand what Operation Holystone was and why it never stopped. Throughout the Cold War, the United States Navy conducted one of the most sensitive and dangerous intelligence operations in military history. American submarines were sent to operate within miles of Soviet naval bases, sometimes inside Soviet territorial waters, to gather intelligence on the Soviet fleet. These missions had many names over the decades: Holystone, Pinnacle, Bollard. The men who sailed them simply called them special operations. The objectives were straightforward in concept and extraordinarily dangerous in execution. American submarines would approach Soviet naval facilities and listen. They recorded the acoustic signatures of Soviet submarines as they departed and returned to port. They mapped the patterns of Soviet naval communications, they monitored missile tests, and in some cases they physically tapped Soviet underwater communication cables to intercept classified military traffic. These operations produced some of the most valuable intelligence of the Cold War. The acoustic recordings allowed American sonar operators to identify individual Soviet submarines by their unique sound profiles. The communication intercepts provided insight into Soviet naval strategy and operations. The missile test observations revealed the capabilities and limitations of Soviet submarine-launched ballistic missiles. The operations were also incredibly risky. American submarines operated alone in hostile waters, often at shallow depths where detection was more likely and maneuverability was limited. If discovered, they could be attacked. If they collided with a Soviet vessel, the diplomatic consequences could be catastrophic. Several near misses had occurred over the decades, and in at least a few cases, collisions had actually happened but were covered up by both sides. When the Soviet Union collapsed in December 1991, the intelligence community in Washington faced a difficult question. The Cold War was over. Russia was no longer the enemy, but the Russian Navy still operated hundreds of nuclear submarines, including ballistic missile boats carrying enough warheads to destroy American civilization. The missiles were still there, the submarines were still on patrol, and nobody in Washington was entirely sure who was in control of them. The decision was made to continue the surveillance. Operation Holystone would not stop just because the Soviet flag had been lowered. If anything, the uncertainty of the transition made the intelligence more important than ever, and so in February 1992, USS Baton Rouge was dispatched to the waters off Severomorsk, the headquarters of Russia's Northern Fleet. Baton Rouge was a Flight 1 Los Angeles-class submarine commissioned in 1977. She was 360 feet long, displaced approximately 6,900 tons submerged, and was powered by a single S-6G pressurized water reactor. She was a veteran boat with an experienced crew, and she had conducted Cold War patrols for 15 years. Her commanding officer was Commander Gordon Krimmer. The waters off Kilden Island, near the entrance to Kola Bay and the approach to Severomorsk, were among the most heavily surveilled waters in the world. Soviet and Russian anti-submarine forces had deployed extensive networks of underwater sensors, patrol aircraft, and surface ships to protect their most important naval base. The shallow waters and rough surface conditions in the Barents Sea in winter created enormous background noise that degraded sonar performance. Breaking waves alone generated 10 times more acoustic interference than open ocean conditions. This made it both easier to hide and harder to detect threats. Baton Rouge was operating at periscope depth, approximately 20 meters below the surface. At this depth, the submarine could raise antennas and periscopes to collect electronic intelligence while remaining submerged. The exact nature of her mission has never been officially disclosed. Some reports suggest she was placing or recovering intelligence monitoring devices on the seabed. Others suggest she was recording Russian submarine acoustic signatures as vessels departed Severomorsk. Whatever her mission, Baton Rouge was using only passive sonar. Active sonar would have revealed her position instantly. In the noisy, shallow waters off Kilden Island, passive sonar detection ranges were severely degraded, perhaps as short as 200 meters. Baton Rouge was essentially operating blind, relying on the assumption that no one knew she was there. That assumption was wrong. B-276. Kostroma was a Project 945, a Sierra II-class nuclear attack submarine. She was one of the most advanced submarines in the Russian fleet. Unlike most Russian submarines, which were built with steel hulls, the Sierra class was constructed with a titanium hull. Titanium is lighter, stronger, and more resistant to corrosion than steel. It allows a submarine to dive deeper and withstand greater pressure. It also makes the submarine more expensive to build, which is why the Soviet Union constructed only 4 Sierra-class boats. Kostroma displaced approximately 9,000 tons submerged. She was over 350 feet long and capable of diving to depths exceeding 2,000 feet. She was armed with torpedoes and cruise missiles, and on the evening of February 11th, she was conducting combat training exercises in the same waters where Baton Rouge was hiding. Neither submarine detected the other. This is the critical point that analysts have debated for 3 decades. The press initially reported that the 2 submarines had been engaged in a cat-and-mouse game, the kind of close-range underwater pursuit that was common during the Cold War. This narrative suggested that one submarine had been tracking the other, and that the collision was the result of an aggressive maneuver gone wrong. But the evidence does not support this. Eugene Myasnikov, a Russian naval analyst who published a detailed technical analysis of the incident, concluded that the shallow water conditions and high ambient noise made it virtually impossible for either submarine to detect the other using passive sonar at the ranges involved. Los Angeles-class submarines have a known blind spot in a 60-degree cone directly behind the boat, where their own propulsion noise masks incoming acoustic signals. If Kostroma approached from behind and below, Baton Rouge would not have heard her until it was too late. The most probable scenario, according to Myasnikov and other analysts, is that the collision happened by chance. Kostroma was ascending to the surface as part of her training exercise. Baton Rouge was hovering at periscope depth directly above. Neither crew knew the other was there until the Kostroma's conning tower struck the underside of Baton Rouge's hull. The impact was violent. Kostroma's sail, the vertical fin that rises above the hull, drove upward into the belly of the American submarine at approximately 8 miles per hour. While 8 miles per hour sounds slow, the force of 9,000 tons of submarine moving at that speed is enormous. The collision crushed and deformed the top of Kostroma's sail. Pieces of Baton Rouge's sonar-absorbing tiles were found embedded in the Russian submarine's damaged structure. Baton Rouge suffered deep scratches and dents along her hull, particularly on the starboard side and bottom. One ballast tank was torn, causing minor flooding. But critically, the pressure hull was not breached. The nuclear reactor was undamaged. There was no radiation release. No crew members on either submarine were injured. Both submarines were able to return to port under their own power. But the incident was far from over. The diplomatic fallout was immediate and intense. Russia complained through diplomatic channels that an American spy submarine had been operating inside Russian territorial waters, just miles from the country's most important naval base, barely 2 months after the 2 nations had supposedly ended their decades-long confrontation. The location of the collision became a point of contention. The United States Navy stated that the collision occurred more than 12 miles from shore in international waters, but Russia uses a different method for calculating territorial boundaries. Under the Russian system, which draws the boundary from a straight baseline connecting the outermost points of land rather than following the coastline, The collision site was approximately 5 miles inside Russian territorial waters. Secretary of State James Baker was forced to meet personally with Russian President Boris Yeltsin to address the incident. Baker assured Yeltsin that the United States would scale back submarine surveillance operations near Russian bases. The Pentagon acknowledged the collision, breaking with its standard policy of never confirming or denying submarine operations. But the promise to scale back was not entirely kept. Just 13 months later, in March 1993, another American submarine, USS Grayling, a Sturgeon-class boat, collided with a Russian Delta-class ballistic missile submarine, K-407 Novomoskovsk, in the same waters off the Kola Peninsula. The second collision confirmed what the Russians had long suspected. The Americans had never really stopped spying. The consequences for Baton Rouge were severe. When the submarine returned to Norfolk for damage assessment, the Navy discovered that the collision damage, combined with the fact that the submarine was approaching the end of its reactor fuel cycle, made repair economically unfeasible. Refueling a nuclear submarine is an enormously expensive and time-consuming process, often costing hundreds of millions of dollars and taking years. The additional cost of repairing the collision damage pushed the total beyond what the Navy was willing to spend, especially in an era of post-Cold War budget cuts. Baton Rouge was deactivated on November 1, 1993, less than 2 years after the collision. She was scrapped at the Puget Sound Naval Shipyard in Bremerton, Washington. She had served for only 16 years, far less than the typical 30-year lifespan of a Los Angeles-class submarine. Russian naval officers took a different view of the outcome. They claimed that Baton Rouge had been so badly damaged that she was effectively a total loss from the moment of the collision. Whether or not this was accurate, the narrative served Russian interests. The Russian Navy had destroyed an American spy submarine without firing a shot. It was, in their telling, a victory, and they made sure everyone knew it. The crew of Kostroma painted a star with the number 1 on their conning tower, in the tradition of Soviet submarines during World War II, marking their kills. The collision that the United States called an accident, Russia celebrated as a combat victory. Kostroma was repaired at the Nerpa shipyard in Snezhnogorsk. The work was completed by June 29, 1992, less than 5 months after the collision. The submarine returned to active service and remained operational for years afterward. The titanium hull that made Sierra-class submarines so expensive to build had also made Kostroma tough enough to survive a collision that ended the career of her American adversary. The Kilden Island incident revealed several uncomfortable truths about submarine operations in the post-Cold War era. First, it demonstrated that the end of the Cold War did not mean the end of underwater espionage. The United States continued to send submarines into Russian waters to gather intelligence, and Russia continued to patrol those waters with some of the most capable submarines in its fleet. The cat-and-mouse games that had defined the Cold War simply continued under different political circumstances. Second, it exposed the inherent danger of operating submarines in shallow, confined waters near an adversary's coast. In deep open ocean, submarines can maintain safe distances and have time to react to unexpected contacts. In the shallow waters off Kilden Island, with sonar ranges measured in hundreds of meters rather than miles, 2 submarines can be on top of each other before either one knows the other exists. Third, the incident highlighted the risks of underwater collisions between nuclear-powered vessels. If the impact had been slightly different, if Kostroma's sail had struck Baton Rouge a few feet to one side, it could have breached the American submarine's single hull pressure boundary. If that had happened in shallow, confined waters near an enemy naval base, the consequences could have been catastrophic. A nuclear reactor breach, while unlikely, was not impossible. And even without a reactor accident, the sinking of an American submarine inside or near Russian territorial waters could have triggered a crisis that would have made the diplomatic embarrassment of the actual collision look trivial. The incident was not an isolated event. Throughout the Cold War, there were at least 20 known collisions or near collisions between American and Soviet submarines. Most were never publicly acknowledged by either side. The risks of underwater espionage were accepted as a necessary cost of gathering intelligence on the enemy's most dangerous weapons. But the Kilden Island collision happened after the enemy was supposed to have become a partner. That was what made it so politically explosive. The United States was asking Russia to cooperate on arms control, economic reform, and nuclear security, and at the same time, American submarines were hiding under Russian warships in Russian waters, collecting intelligence that could only be useful if Russia remained a potential adversary. The tension between these two realities, cooperation on the surface and espionage below it, defined the US-Russia relationship in the 1990s. In many ways, it still does. The waters off Kilden Island are quiet now, at least compared to the Cold War, but Russian and American submarines still patrol the Barents Sea. Russian submarines still deploy from Severomorsk on ballistic missile patrols, and American submarines still watch them go. The rules of the game have not changed, only the flags have. This is Naval Depth. Subscribe and stay with us as this story continues.